Hi, I'm Alyx of Ornament Designs, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I made this kimekomi ornament using a hard polystyrene foam shape and a hot foam cutter. Kimekomi is a Japanese handicraft technique for making decorative ornaments. Grooves are cut into a molded shape, and then fabric is placed over the shape and tucked into the cut grooves. I use this technique to make Christmas ornaments and Easter eggs. I use polystyrene foam rather than traditional materials because smooth polystyrene foam is usually available at most craft supply stores. I usually prefer to use lower density polystyrene because it's easier to cut using a regular craft knife. However, many years ago, I bought some shapes that were a higher density polystyrene, and I couldn't cut them with my regular craft knife. So I put them away and decided I'd figure out what to do with them later. They've been in storage now for many years, and I'm finally ready to tackle this problem. So for this experiment, I have this hard foam shape, which I've already drawn the lines on, and my new foam cutter. This is a clean cut foam cutter by FloraCraft, and I bought this at Joann's, which of course is now defunct and gone, but I do believe they also sell these at Michael's. I think you can also get them on Amazon. It was very affordable. And while I'm pulling this out of the package, let me tell you a bit about the shape that I'm using today. This is a smooth foam brand, high density polystyrene foam shape. I bought this many years ago, and I don't even know if they sell these anymore. So you can go onto Plasteel Corp's website and see if they still sell these shapes, but I have no idea. I've already measured and marked the lines on this foam shape, just like I would on a ball. And if you're interested in learning how I measure and mark my foam shapes, please check out some of my other tutorials. I have a beginner's tutorial, which is great. It goes into all of those details. This video is not sponsored by either of these companies. I bought these myself, and so this is my own honest opinion about what I think of these products. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Of course, it comes with a USB. Luckily, I have an adapter and an extension cord. And it also comes with this handy little aluminum stand where I could set the hot part of the cutter on. And so it stays off the table and it won't melt my surface here. So that is nice. Okay, so I've turned it on and I've waited about 2 minutes, and now it should be hot enough. Oh, and I should mention that I am following the instructions by having a big window open, so my room is very well ventilated. And just as extra protection for myself, I'm wearing a special mask for projects like this. I don't want to accidentally breathe in any fumes or anything because this is melting plastic. And so now I'm slowly starting to melt this, starting from the center line. It's kind of an equator. It's not a sphere, so it's not really an equator, but the center mold line. And I'm slowly using the tip to kind of trace along the line that I drew and melt in a very shallow line. And it's not melting it enough, deeply enough really, for tucking any fabric at this point. I'm just lightly trying to trace that line to get myself kind of like a starting line. And then later I'll go and try to carve the groove more deeply. The melted plastic does accumulate on the end of this, so I'm using this bit of cardstock to wipe off that melted plastic. It is hot. I can feel the heat through the paper, that cardstock paper, but I'm not burning my hands. Paper is thick enough I didn't burn my fingers. And I'm just going to continue to slowly carve out this line. And what I'm discovering as I do this is if I lay the entire length of that metal piece down into the grooves, it will more quickly and more deeply cut the groove. So it seems like most of the heat is in the full length of the tool and not just at the tip of it. All right, so at this point, I'm not noticing any horrible noxious fumes. It might be because my window is open and it's a windy day and I've got a lot of ventilation. I'm liking the control of having a little less heat at the tip of the tool. I can slowly cut a shallow groove to start with, and then I can use the full length of the tool to cut my groove deeper. I'm noticing that the groove itself is much wider than I'm used to because I'm used to using a thin knife, and this tool is actually like a full millimeter or more wide, or it might be about 2 millimeters wide actually. And that's different than what I'm used to. And because this foam is hard and because it's dense, it isn't going to have like a flexibility. It's not going to be able to grab onto my fabric when I start tucking it in. So I'm probably going to have to do a more traditional tuck with this one, as in putting the glue in the grooves to hold the fabric in the groove. So yeah, I mean, so far it's not too bad. It's much better than trying to cut it with a regular knife. It's my hand, I'm not having to use any pressure with my hand. It's melting fairly easily. In fact, I don't want to use too much pressure because the more pressure I give it, the more chance I have of accidentally melting and cutting the groove too deep, and I don't want to do that. So I'm not using a whole lot of pressure on it. All right, and so I'm just going to continue around to the other side of the shape, continuing along this line, and I'm going to go ahead and cut, or melt, I should say, all of the grooves into the rest of these lines on the shape. All right, so now all of the lines are cut, and what I've noticed is that the edge of the grooves where I've melted that foam has become extremely hard and brittle, and it really needs to be smoothed down because now I've got this like raised line of hard melted plastic along the edges of the groove. And so I'm going to use a rotary tool to sand down the edges of those grooves, make them smooth. This may not be necessary because I'm actually planning on using some quill batting because this shape is so hard and I'd like it to be a softer, just to have a softer feel to it. So I am going to use quill batting. So this step actually might be unnecessary. But I don't like the way it feels, and I happen to have this tool anyway, so I might as well go ahead and file down those rough edges. While I'm doing this, I'm noticing that because this polystyrene is so dense, if I'm not careful, I can pull a whole chunk of it off. And it's quite brittle. It's strong, but if you put a little bit too much pressure on it, if I get my filing tool in the wrong place, it has a potential of taking off a whole chunk. So I've got to be really careful. All right, so now I'm finished with the cutting and the filing, and now it's time to see if I can tuck some fabric into these grooves. For the remainder of this video, I'm not going to be going into great detail about the rest of the steps because this video was to focus on that cutting tool, the hot knife itself. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be skipping through, speeding it up, going through the steps very quickly, just to give you an idea of what I'm doing to finish off this ornament. If you want more details about each of these steps, I have a lot more videos that go into those kind of details. Here you can see that I've transferred my plastic cutting template onto a piece of tracing paper, and now I'm going to cut out my batting. Once I've got a piece of batting cut out, I'm going to glue it to the section. Now I'll use my pattern to cut out a piece of this fabulous Japanese fabric that I'm going to use. Now it's time to start tucking in the fabric. As I mentioned before, I'm doing this a little bit differently than I usually do it. Because this foam is extra dense and it doesn't have any flexibility or give, it's not going to grab onto the fabric like it usually does with a softer foam ball. So I'm putting some glue into the grooves first, and hopefully this will help hold that fabric into the groove. This is how they do it for traditional kimekomi. Because traditional kimekomi uses a wood composite, it's also hard and doesn't have any flexibility. So I decided it would be better to use a more traditional technique with this particular ornament. As I'm tucking in this fabric, it seems to be working okay. If you're using the same tool to tuck as you did to apply the glue, make sure you wipe off the glue first before you start tucking. This first seam is not giving me too much trouble. And once I finished the first seam, I turned it around to do the other seam. Because this foam is so stiff, I can't stuff as much material into that groove as I'm used to. So I've really got to trim a lot of this excess off. If you've got some curved scissors that would really let you get a close cut, I highly recommend using them here. Unfortunately, I don't have any. And as I'm tucking the fabric over this corner, you'll see that little pieces of the foam are coming off. So I had to be particularly careful at these corners because they are very brittle and I didn't want to take off a large chunk because that is hard to repair. These little pieces are not going to be a big deal, but just be warned that it is brittle and to be careful at any corners. All right, so tucking in this first piece of fabric was not too bad. Now I'm moving on to the next section, and I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did on the previous section. Now, I will tell you that I had to set this down for a couple of days and come back to it. And so the glue from the first section dried completely. And then when I moved on to this section, the tucking was so difficult because I was dealing with a seam that already had fabric tucked in it that was glued and it was dried hard. So I had to use a lot of pressure to get the fabric tucked down into that groove. So what I learned from this experience is that you should probably do all of this tucking of all of the fabric all at one time before your glue dries really hard. The next thing that I figured out after doing this second section is that I didn't cut the grooves deep enough. I needed more space to tuck my fabric in. It's hard to say exactly how much you do need. It's the kind of thing you just need to experiment with and figure out what works for you, I think. But I think for this type of polystyrene, a deeper groove is going to be easier for you to work with. That being said, for this ornament, I'm not going to go back and try to recut my grooves. I'm just going to leave them as is and do the best I can with what I've got. All right, so that seam took a long time, so I had to jump ahead, and I did it the best that I could. It's not perfect, but it'll do because I'll put some cord over the top of it and you won't be able to see the imperfections. And now I will move on to the next seam and the rest of the ornament. But I think you guys get the idea, so I'm going to skip ahead. And here I've got all of the batting and fabric applied to the ornament. At this top point, I cut a little bit too much of the fabric off the end. I'm going to put a bead cap on this, so this will be covered up and won't be noticeable. I've decided to use some regular craft glue to glue down this wide braided cord. I typically use my glue stick to glue cord down, but I think for this wide braided cord that this liquid craft glue will actually be better. So I'll just put that glue right into the seam and then cover the glue with my braided cord. And I've had this braided cord for so long. This has been in my stash for well over 10 years, possibly close to 20. So this is just proof to myself and my family, especially my husband, that yes, I do need this cord. No, I will not throw it away. I will use it eventually. Once all my cord is glued down over the seams, I've gotten out some bead caps, and they're not quite large enough, so I'm going to pull them out, pull the petals of this flower out and widen it so that it covers the entire top of the ornament. Also, rather than using ribbon to hang my ornament, I've decided to use this very thin gold cord, and it'll fit through the hole of this bead cap. Now, I wasn't able to pin this bead cap to the top, so I've decided to use hot glue. But unfortunately, I paused the recording to let the glue gun heat up and then forgot to hit record again. And so I didn't actually record myself gluing the thing to the top. But you probably understand how to use a hot glue gun. And this is yet another deviation from what I normally do. I don't usually use hot glue, and I'm very happy with how securely this top is held on. So anyway, that is the finished ornament. And I learned a lot doing this one and decided to make a second one using all of the techniques that I figured out and learned. And I had this lantern shape and thought it would look really nice if I sort of did a mock lantern ornament. And I think it turned out really well. In fact, the straight lines along those edges were really easy to cut with the hot cutter. I just laid the tool down against the straight edge and it just melted in a perfectly straight line right where I needed it. It was so easy, and I cut the grooves a bit deeper this time. I got all the fabric tucked before the glue dried, and I'm really happy with the results. So I hope this video was useful for you if you've been on the edge deciding whether or not you wanted to buy one of these hot cutters. I hope this video helps you make that decision. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful, and if you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really does help other people find me. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!